My dad was unconscious in the ICU, and I thought the nightmare was the stroke until a nurse told me I wasn't allowed to know anything because my brother was listed as medical proxy. I hadn't signed a thing. My mom wouldn't explain. And in that moment I realized someone had rewritten the rules. My name is Ethan. I'm 38 years old and I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I work as a systems analyst for a mid-sized bank. Nothing glamorous, just steady work, long hours, and the kind of job where you're always on call when something breaks. If you met my family at a barbecue, you'd probably think we were normal. My dad, Robert, was the calm one, the let's talk it through guy. My mom, Linda, was the organizer, the one who kept birthdays, appointments, holidays, everything moving like clockwork. And my younger brother, Kyle, was the center of gravity in our house. He always had been. I don't say that with bitterness as my default setting. I say it like a fact you learn to live around, like the way a room is shaped. When we were kids, Kyle was the one who needed more understanding, the one who was just going through a phase, the one who didn't mean it like that. I was the one who got told to be mature, to let things go, to not make it harder. By the time I was an adult, I'd built my own routine that didn't require their approval. I didn't cut them off. I still called. I still showed up for Thanksgiving. Still helped my dad with little tech problems and my mom with paperwork. But I kept a certain emotional distance because it was easier than constantly feeling like I was competing for a seat at a table I'd technically belonged to my whole life. Then one Tuesday morning in late October, my phone lit up while I was in the middle of a system update at work. It was Kyle. His voice was tight, clipped, like he was reading something off a screen. Dad collapsed. They're taking him to Mercy. It looks bad. For a second I didn't understand the words. Collapsed sounded like a fainting spell, like dehydration, like something you recover from after a few tests and a lecture about sodium. But Kyle said Mercy, the hospital, and looks bad. And then I heard something in the background that sounded like doors and someone saying, "Sir, over here." I grabbed my keys, left my laptop open on my desk like I'd be back in 5 minutes, and drove to the hospital on pure autopilot. By the time I got there, my mother was already in the waiting area outside the ICU doors, arms folded so tightly it looked like she was trying to hold herself together physically. Kyle sat next to her, legs bouncing, checking his phone over and over like it could give him a different reality if he refreshed enough times. When my mom saw me, her face didn't soften. It didn't do that thing people's faces do when they're relieved someone else arrived. Instead, she looked me up and down like she was assessing whether I'd be useful or disruptive. "Where have you been?" she snapped. I stared at her. "I drove straight here. Kyle called me 20 minutes ago." She made a small sound of disapproval anyway, like the timing of a medical emergency had personally inconvenienced her. "They're saying it was a massive stroke," she said. "They're trying to stabilize him." He's massive stroke, stabilize, not awake. Those were ICU words. Those were words that belonged to other families, not ours. My dad was the guy who took morning walks and fixed the neighbor's fence and made coffee so strong it could strip paint. I asked the first logical question I could manage. "Have you talked to the doctor?" Kyle answered before my mom could. "Yeah, I did. They briefed me." That should have been comforting. Instead, it made me feel off balance, because I was standing right there and nobody had looked at me like I was part of us. I turned to my mom. "What did they say? What's the plan?" She kept her eyes on the ICU doors. "They're monitoring swelling. He's on a ventilator. They're doing what they can." That was vague in a way that didn't match the seriousness of the situation. It sounded rehearsed, like a summary given to someone who didn't need details. I stood up and walked toward the nurse's station because that's what you do when someone you love is behind those doors. You ask, you insist, you get answers. A nurse with tired eyes and a tight bun looked up when I approached. Her badge said Jenna. I told her my name and that I was Robert's son. I asked how my dad was doing and whether we could speak to the physician. Her expression changed subtly, professional, but guarded. "I'm sorry," she said. "Are you listed as an authorized contact?" "I'm his son," I repeated, slower, like that would make it make sense. "I understand," she said, still calm. "But due to privacy regulations, I can only share detailed information with the patient's designated decision-maker and the people they authorize." Decision-maker. Designated. Those words landed wrong. "My mom is right there," I said, gesturing back. "Linda, his wife." Jenna glanced in that direction and nodded slightly, like she already knew exactly who my mother was. "Yes, ma'am," she said, and then she looked back at me. "The chart lists Kyle as the medical proxy." I actually laughed once, sharply, because it sounded like a mistake, like a glitch, like someone clicked the wrong box on a form. Kyle, I echoed. My brother. Jenna gave me the kind of sympathetic look nurses get very good at. Yes, I'm sorry. I walked back to the waiting area with my heart pounding, not just from fear for my dad, but from the sudden nauseating realization that something important had already happened while I was driving over. Something administrative, something quiet, something that changed the entire shape of the next hours, days, maybe months. I stopped in front of my mother and Kyle. Why is Kyle listed as Dad's medical proxy? My mom's gaze finally met mine, and it wasn't confused or surprised. It was annoyed, like I'd asked why the sky was blue. Because someone has to make decisions, she said. I'm not saying someone shouldn't, I replied, trying to keep my voice level. I'm asking why it's Kyle and not you. You're his spouse. Kyle shifted in his seat. He didn't look proud. He looked cautious, like he knew he was holding something people might try to take back. My mom spoke again. The hospital asked, "There are forms. Your father can't speak for himself. They needed a point person." Kyle handled it. I felt my face heat up. "So you made him the decision maker without telling me?" My mom's mouth tightened. "Ethan, don't start. Not here." That phrase, "don't start," was a trap door. It meant, your feelings are an inconvenience. Your questions are drama. Your presence is conditional. "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I just want to understand." Dad would have told me if he wanted Kyle making medical decisions. Kyle finally spoke, voice defensive. "I'm not doing anything wrong. Mom said it was urgent. They needed someone, and I'm the one who's been here." That last part was a knife with a polite handle. I'd been at work. I'd been living my life. I'd been assuming my parents were fine because that's what they always projected. Fine, 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 until suddenly they weren't. "Been here," I repeated. "For the last hour." Kyle's jaw flexed. "For the last year." He shot back. "You're not around like you think you are." My mom nodded like that settled it. Like the past year erased the fact that my dad was my dad too. I could have yelled. I could have made a scene. But the ICU doors were 10 feet away, and my father was on the other side, unconscious, and the last thing I wanted was to become the problem in the narrative they'd clearly already written. So I swallowed it. I sat down. I waited. I tried to be helpful anyway. Hours passed in that dim waiting room light. Every few minutes a staff member would come through the doors and call out a name. When they called Kyle, my mom would stand up instantly and go with him, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I would start to rise too, and my mom would flick her hand without looking at me. "Just Kyle," she'd say. "They only need Kyle." It happened so many times that it stopped feeling like a misunderstanding and started feeling like a strategy. At one point I tried to walk alongside them anyway, and a different nurse, older, more stern, stopped me gently but firmly. "Sir, I'm sorry. We can't allow anyone beyond this point except the designated medical proxy and one support person." One support person. My mom went in as the support person. Of course she did. And I sat back down alone, staring at a vending machine that hummed like a bad joke. When my mom and Kyle returned, they spoke in low voices that cut off when I leaned in. Their phones were always angled away from me. Their body language was closed, like they were holding a meeting I wasn't invited to. I tried to make it about Dad instead of them. I asked concrete questions. What meds is he on? Did they do imaging? Is surgery on the table? What's his prognosis? And the answers I got were always thin, vague, filtered. "They're managing it. They're monitoring. They said we'll know more tomorrow." It was like listening to someone summarize a movie they didn't want to spoil, except it wasn't a movie. It was my father's brain swelling inside his skull, and I couldn't even get a straight answer because I wasn't authorized. Late that evening, my mom finally snapped when I asked to be included on the update calls. "You don't get to barge in now and act like the devoted son," she said, loud enough that a couple across the room looked over. "You made yourself a stranger to this family a long time ago." The words stunned me, not because they were new, but because she said them here, in this place, in a room where people were praying and crying and holding each other up. Kyle stared at the floor, saying nothing, not defending me, not correcting her, just letting it happen, because it benefited him to let it happen. I felt something cold settle in my chest, a kind of clarity. This wasn't just a crisis, it was a takeover. And it didn't matter how calm I stayed, or how reasonable my questions were. The structure had already been set. Kyle spoke, my mother managed, and I watched from behind the glass. That night, I went home for a few hours to shower and change, because I could barely think straight, and my clothes smelled like stale hospital air. When I came back early the next morning, the ICU doors were already swinging open and shut, staff moving with that brisk, purposeful energy that means something has shifted. My mom and Kyle were there again, of course, sitting in the same seats like they'd claimed them. My mom held a folder, papers clipped together, the kind of forms you sign when decisions get heavier. I walked up and asked the simplest question in the world. Did something happen overnight? My mom didn't look up from the folder. Kyle's handling it. Kyle's eyes met mine for a second, and in that second I saw it. Not just fear for Dad, but control. A strange, quiet satisfaction that the hospital recognized him as the person who mattered most. I leaned closer. Handling what? My mom looked up then, and her voice went flat and sharp. Ethan, do not make this harder. We have enough to deal with. And right then, a doctor in a white coat stepped into the waiting room and called out, Kyle Mercer. Kyle stood immediately. The doctor glanced around. You're the medical proxy, correct? Kyle nodded. Yes. The doctor looked at my mom. And you're the family support? My mom nodded too, already moving. Then the doctor's gaze slid over me like I was a chair, like I was part of the furniture, like my relationship to the man inside that ICU didn't exist in any way that mattered. I opened my mouth to speak. My name, my role, my right to know. And before I could, my mother said, without even lowering her voice, he's just here. Just here. That was the moment it stopped being about confusion or paperwork or hospital policy. That was the moment I realized someone had quietly rewritten the rules while I was still standing in the hallway, and if I didn't figure out how and why, I was going to lose my father without ever being allowed to fight for him. I watched them disappear through the ICU doors, my mom's hand already on Kyle's elbow like she was steering him, and for a second I just stood there feeling stupidly weightless. Not sad, not even angry yet, just erased. A woman in scrubs walked past me carrying a clipboard, and I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the glass partition. A grown man in a wrinkled hoodie, unshaven, holding a paper cup of hospital coffee like it was an anchor. I looked like someone waiting for a ride, not someone waiting for his father. I sat back down and tried to make my thoughts line up in a straight, rational order. My dad was in critical condition. That was the real emergency. Everything else, proxy forms, who spoke to which nurse, who got what update, should have been secondary. But it wasn't, because those secondary things were shaping what happened to my dad minute by minute. Decisions about medication changes, procedures, even basic things like whether they tried a more aggressive intervention or pivoted to comfort care. I knew enough to understand that in an ICU, the person who speaks has power. And right now, that person wasn't me. After about 40 minutes, Kyle and my mom came back out. Kyle's face looked pinched, like he'd been trying to sound confident while hearing words no one wants to hear. My mom looked composed in that way she always looked, like she'd decided emotion was a luxury she didn't intend to pay for. I stood. What did the doctor say? Kyle hesitated, and my mom stepped in immediately. They said his condition is unstable, she said. We need to prepare ourselves. Prepare ourselves. That phrase from my mom meant something very specific. She had already moved the situation into a category where she was in charge, and anyone who questioned her would be accused of denial. What does that mean? I asked. Prepare ourselves how? Are they doing surgery? Is there bleeding? Is the swelling worse? Kyle rubbed his palms on his jeans. They're adjusting sedation. They're watching pressure. They said the next 24 hours matter. I tried to keep my voice calm. Did they talk about a DNR? Kyle's eyes flicked to my mom. It was quick, but it was enough. My stomach tightened. Kyle, did they bring up a DNR? My mom's voice hardened. Ethan. Not in the waiting room. That's exactly where you talk about it, I said, not caring anymore if I sounded difficult. That's where families make those decisions. Kyle swallowed. They asked what Dad would want. That's all. And what did you say? I asked. Kyle's jaw worked like he was chewing something tough. I said we'd discuss it. My mom's lips pressed together. She didn't like that he'd admitted there was a decision to be made. My mom preferred the illusion that she was just reacting to events, not shaping them. I looked between them. We need to be on the same page. Dad never filled out anything, right? Not that I know of. My mom's eyes narrowed, like I'd insulted her by implying she didn't have every document in existence filed in some labeled binder. Your father and I discussed these things. When? I asked. And with who present? She stared at me, and the waiting room felt suddenly smaller. Ethan, she said slowly, this is not about you. That's what she always did. She turned questions into accusations. If I pushed, I was selfish. If I didn't, I was irrelevant. I wanted to scream, but instead I said the one thing I could stand behind. This is about Dad, and if you're making decisions, I want to know what they are. Kyle exhaled, irritated now. Look, they're not going to let 5 people crowd the doctor. It's easier if one person handles it. One person, I repeated. Fine, but why is that person you? Kyle's eyes flashed. Because Mom asked me to. Because I'm here. Because you're. He stopped himself, but the words were already hanging there. Because you're not. That afternoon I asked the nurse at the station, Jenna again, if there was a patient advocate or social worker I could speak to. I tried to sound polite, not like someone trying to start a war in the ICU hallway. Jenna nodded like she'd dealt with this exact situation 1,000 times. I can call the unit social worker, she said. But I want to be clear. If your father has a healthcare power of attorney on file naming your brother, our hands are tied. On file, I repeated. So there is a document. She hesitated, and I could tell she was walking the line between compassion and compliance. There's an entry in the chart, she said carefully. I'm not able to show you the document itself. An entry isn't a document, I said. She didn't disagree. The social worker arrived about half an hour later. Tanya, mid-40s, kind eyes, efficient posture. She led me to a small consultation room with beige walls and a box of tissues on the table. Like grief was expected to leak out of you on schedule. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, that I was Robert Mercer's son, that I hadn't been informed of any medical proxy arrangement, that my mother and brother were shutting me out, that I wasn't trying to override medical decisions, but I wanted transparency, and I wanted to know how my brother became the proxy in the first place. Tanya listened, nodding. Then she said something that made my throat go dry. In situations like this, she said, the hospital follows what's on file. If there's a healthcare power of attorney, we follow that. If there isn't, we follow the legal default hierarchy, usually the spouse first, then adult children. But your mother has identified your brother as the agent. Identified, I repeated. That's not the same as proving. Tanya's expression tightened slightly. We do have an internal verification process. What did you verify? I asked. Did you see a signed document? Not just hear someone say it exists. She didn't answer directly, which was an answer in itself. If you believe there's a dispute, she said, you can pursue it through legal channels. The hospital can't adjudicate family conflicts. Family conflicts. Like this was a squabble about who got Dad's truck, not who decided whether Dad lived. I leaned forward. What can I do right now? Today, to at least receive updates. Tanya folded her hands. You can ask the medical proxy to authorize information sharing with you. I almost laughed. And if he won't, then your options are limited, she said gently, unless a court order changes decision-making authority. A court order. For my own father. While he was unconscious in a bed behind double doors, I left the consultation room feeling like I'd hit a wall made of polite language. Back in the waiting area, my mom was on her phone. Kyle was scrolling, not even pretending to read. When my mom saw me, she ended her call instantly, as if my presence contaminated whatever conversation she'd been having. Who were you talking to? I asked. Her eyes were cool. The insurance company. I knew my mom. That answer could mean anything from insurance to a cousin to my dad's employer. About what? About what we need to do, she said. Which you would know if you were involved. I stared at her. I'm trying to be involved. She stood up, suddenly sharp. No, you're trying to control. You always do this. You show up and act like you're the reasonable one while you stir things up. Kyle stood too, shoulders squared like he was preparing to block me physically if I moved. My mom stepped closer, lowering her voice in that way that felt more threatening than yelling. Listen to me. We do not need a third opinion. We do not need an audience. We need someone who can make decisions without getting emotional. Kyle can do that. I felt my nails dig into my palms. I'm not emotional. I'm informed, she scoffed. Informed? You don't even know what medications your father takes. That's not true, I snapped, and then I caught myself and lowered my voice again. And even if it was, that doesn't justify keeping me in the dark. Her eyes narrowed. You made your choices, Ethan. There it was, the old storyline. I moved out. I built my own life. I didn't orbit Kyle's needs and my mother's expectations. Therefore, I forfeited my right to be treated like family when it mattered. Kyle looked at me with something close to contempt. Just stop, he muttered. You're stressing Mom out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Dad is dying, I said, and you're worried about Mom being stressed. My mother's face hardened. Do not talk to me like that. I took a breath, forcing myself not to explode. Fine, then let's talk facts. Show me the healthcare power of attorney, the document that names Kyle. For the first time, my mom's composure cracked, not into sadness but into anger. How dare you accuse us of something like that? I'm not accusing, I lied, because I was. I'm asking. Kyle's voice went tight. Dad did it, okay? He did it. A while ago. Because he knew Mom would fall apart and he knew I'd handle it. It was too smooth, too convenient, and it painted Kyle as the hero in his own story. My dad, quiet, fair, steady, would never have chosen those words. I held Kyle's gaze. When did he do it? Kyle blinked once. Last year. Where? I asked. Kyle's eyes darted again. At his primary care office. My mom jumped in. Ethan, this is disgusting. But Kyle's answer had a problem. If it was at his primary care office, there would be a copy. There would be a record. There would be a witness. And if there was, why wouldn't my mom simply pull it out and end this conversation? Unless she couldn't. That night I drove to my parents' house. I still had a key. My mom never asked for it back, probably because in her mind I was never really in enough to be out. The house was dark and quiet, and stepping inside felt like walking into a museum of my childhood. Everything in place, everything curated, nothing that actually belonged to who I was now. I went straight to my dad's home office. He kept important papers in a small fireproof safe in the closet. Deeds, tax returns, old passports, the kind of boring adult things that suddenly become priceless when someone can't speak for themselves. The safe had a keypad. I tried the codes I knew. My parents' anniversary, my dad's birthday, the last 4 digits of the house phone. I got locked out after 3 attempts. I stood there in the dark, breathing hard, anger rising again, not just at the safe, but at the fact that I was reduced to sneaking around my own parents' house like a criminal just to find out if my father had signed away his medical voice. I forced myself to stop. This wasn't a movie. I couldn't hack a safe in 30 seconds and emerge with a signed document and triumphant music behind me. So I did the next best thing. I searched for anything else. Folders, file cabinets, desk drawers. I found tax paperwork, a stack of appliance manuals, an old envelope of family photos, and a folder labeled insurance, but nothing that said healthcare power of attorney, nothing that said advance directive, nothing that said in my father's handwriting, I want Kyle to decide if I live. When I finally left the house, it was after midnight. I sat in my car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, trying to figure out what I was actually dealing with. Because if Kyle wasn't legally the proxy, then what? Had my mom pushed the hospital into accepting him anyway? Had she convinced someone that a document existed? Had Kyle signed something he shouldn't have signed? And if that was true, then every decision made so far, every medication adjustment, every consent, every we need to prepare ourselves was happening under a cloud I couldn't prove yet. I drove back to the hospital and slept in the parking garage for 2 hours, the seat reclined, my phone on my chest like a heart monitor. The next morning, I walked into the ICU waiting area and saw my mom holding that same folder again, but this time there was a new man sitting with her and Kyle. He wore a blazer and carried a leather portfolio. He looked too polished for the ICU, like he'd taken a wrong turn on the way to a meeting. My mom saw me and her face tightened immediately, like she hadn't expected me to keep showing up. The man stood halfway and offered a hand. "Ethan?" he asked. I hesitated, then shook it. "Yeah, I'm Mark Holloway," he said, "family attorney." My stomach dropped. I looked at my mom. "You hired an attorney?" My mom's voice was calm, almost satisfied. "We needed to get our affairs in order." Kyle watched me closely, like he wanted to see whether I'd back down now that a professional had entered the room. Mark opened his portfolio slightly, not pulling anything out yet, just letting me see there were documents inside. "Ethan," he said gently, "your mother and brother asked me to help ensure there's no confusion regarding medical decision-making." Confusion, another soft word for something hard. I held my voice steady. "Great. Then show me the healthcare power of attorney." Mark's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes became more cautious. "We're working on obtaining the relevant paperwork," he said. "Obtaining, not presenting, not verifying. Obtaining." My mom's jaw tightened. "Ethan, don't do this." But it was already done. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening kind of logic. They didn't have it. Not cleanly, not clearly, not in a way they could slap down in front of me and say, "See, You're wrong, and if they didn't have it, then Kyle wasn't supposed to be making decisions at all. I looked at my brother, and for the first time I saw past his defensive posture. Underneath it, he looked nervous. Not about my dad, about being caught. And right then I understood the real problem wasn't that I'd been excluded. The real problem was that while I was just here, someone else had been speaking for my father without permission, and my father was too unconscious to object. Mark Holloway didn't say much after that. He just stood there like he'd been hired to make my mother feel legitimate, not to find the truth. My mom slid the folder closer to her chest. "We are not doing this in public," she said, as if she hadn't just brought a lawyer into the ICU waiting room. Kyle leaned back, trying to look bored, but his knee bounced under the chair. I noticed it because Kyle only did that when he was waiting for something to go his way. I kept my voice low. "I'm not asking for a fight. I'm asking for proof. You told the hospital Kyle is Dad's proxy. Either there's a document or there isn't." Mark cleared his throat. "Ethan, sometimes families misunderstand what's been signed. There may be a general authorization on file. And, no," I cut in, still quiet. "This isn't a misunderstanding, because the hospital is treating Kyle as the decision maker. That's not a casual thing. That's consent for procedures. That's end-of-life decisions. That's everything." My mom's expression flickered. Annoyance, then something sharper. "Your father wouldn't want you interrogating us while he's fighting for his life." The way she said fighting for his life sounded like a slogan she could use to shut down any question. I looked past her, toward the ICU doors. "What's the plan today?" I asked Kyle. "What are they doing? Are they changing anything? Are they talking about surgery again?" Kyle hesitated just a beat too long. Then he said, "They want to talk about options." "Options like what?" My mom answered instead. "Options like what's realistic." That wasn't an answer. That was a direction. I felt my pulse throb in my ears. "Is the team recommending withdrawal of life support?" Kyle's eyes widened slightly, like I'd said the quiet part out loud. My mom's face went cold. "Ethan," she said, "you are being dramatic." Mark shifted his weight, uncomfortable, like he'd stepped into something messier than he'd expected. "Perhaps," he said gently, "we can schedule a family meeting with the attending physician. That way everyone hears the same information." My mom snapped, "We already get the information." I looked at Mark. "I want that meeting." Kyle opened his mouth, then closed it. My mom stared at me like I'd slapped her. And that was the first time I realized something else. They didn't just want to keep me uninformed. They wanted to keep the doctors from seeing me ask questions. Because questions create records. Questions create accountability. And if Kyle was sitting in those consults alone, with my mom hovering beside him, then whatever pressure they applied, whatever narrative they pushed, happened without witnesses. That afternoon, I asked to speak to the charge nurse, not because I thought she'd hand me my dad's chart, but because I needed someone, anyone, inside that system to understand that there was a dispute. The charge nurse introduced herself as Melissa. She was calm in that practiced way ICU staff develop. Soft voice, steady eyes, no wasted movement. We stood near the nurse's station, close enough that she could keep an eye on her unit but far enough that she could speak quietly. "I'm concerned," I said, "that my father's decision-making authority has been assigned incorrectly. I'm his son. I've been excluded completely. And I'm being told there's a healthcare power of attorney naming my brother, but no one will show it to me." Melissa didn't react defensively. That alone felt like oxygen. She nodded slowly. "I can't discuss documents with you," she said, "but I can note in the chart that there's a family conflict regarding surrogate decision-making. That can trigger an ethics consult." My chest tightened. "Do it." Melissa's gaze held mine. "Just so you know, an ethics consult doesn't override legal documents. It's for communication breakdowns and decision-making concerns." "Communication is broken," I said, "and I'm concerned about the decisions being made." Melissa nodded once. "All right." Then she lowered her voice slightly. "Your father's case has been very active. Lots of calls, lots of requests." I blinked. Calls. She didn't elaborate, but she didn't need to. In a hospital, lots of calls meant someone was working the system, pressuring, pushing, demanding, trying to steer. I felt a chill run through me. "Is that documented?" Melissa's face stayed professional, but her eyes sharpened. "Everything is documented in some form," she said. "Notes, timestamps, communication logs." That was the first time anyone inside the hospital said words that sounded like a trail. A trail. I thanked her and walked back to the waiting room where my mom and Kyle sat close together, heads bent over Kyle's phone. When I sat down across from them, my mom didn't even look up. Kyle finally glanced at me. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Trying to make sure Dad has a voice," I said. My mom's gaze lifted slowly. "He does." "No," I said. "He has you." Her face tightened. "We are his family. So am I." She held my stare. "You're here now because it makes you feel better. Not because you've earned a say." The cruelty of it was almost impressive in its calmness. Like she'd rehearsed the line. Like she'd been waiting years to use it when the stakes were high enough that I couldn't walk away without looking like the villain. Kyle scoffed. "Can you just stop acting like we're criminals?" I looked at him. "Then stop hiding paperwork." Kyle's jaw worked. "Dad signed it. End of story." "Then you can show me," I said. My mom leaned forward. "Ethan, listen carefully. If you keep pushing, you will make this harder on your father." I stared at her, trying to understand the logic. My father was unconscious. My pushing couldn't stress him out, but it could stress her out. It could threaten her control. So when she said harder on your father, what she meant was harder on me. 2 days later, my dad's attending physician asked for a family meeting. Not because my mom requested it, because the staff wanted it. That's what happens when nurses sense the tension and decide the safest route is to put everyone in the same room, with witnesses. They brought us into a small conference room, a table, a whiteboard, a few chairs that felt too firm for how long those conversations can last. The physician introduced herself as Dr. Nguyen. She looked exhausted but focused. A respiratory therapist stood against the wall. Melissa, the charge nurse, was there too. Tanya, the social worker, joined halfway through, holding a folder. My mom sat closest to Dr. Nguyen. Kyle sat beside my mom like a shield. Mark Holloway sat near them, his portfolio on the table like a symbol. "We have representation." I sat on the other side, alone. Dr. Nguyen started with the medical facts. Massive stroke, significant brain swelling, ventilator support, sedation, risk of secondary complications. They'd managed to stabilize some things, but his neurological function was uncertain. Then she said the sentence I'd been bracing for. "We need to discuss goals of care." My mom's posture straightened like she'd been waiting for that phrase specifically. Dr. Nguyen continued. "At this point, there are a few paths. Continued aggressive support, possibly a tracheostomy and feeding tube if he cannot wean from the ventilator, with transfer to long-term acute care. Or, if the family believes he wouldn't want prolonged life support with low chances of meaningful recovery, we can discuss comfort-focused care." I watched Kyle. His eyes stayed on Dr. Nguyen, but he kept swallowing. I looked at my mom. She didn't look scared. She looked ready. Dr. Nguyen glanced at Tanya. "Who is the legal surrogate decision-maker?" Tanya looked down at her papers. "Kyle Mercer is listed as healthcare agent." I felt my throat tighten. Even in this room, in front of staff, the lie or the half-truth held. Dr. Nguyen nodded and turned to Kyle. "Kyle, do you have an advance directive or healthcare power of attorney document for your father?" Kyle's mouth opened, then paused. "We're working on getting it." Dr. Nguyen's eyes sharpened slightly. "Working on getting it," she repeated. Mark leaned forward smoothly. "Doctor, there's no question the family agrees Kyle is the appropriate point of contact. The paperwork is in progress." Dr. Nguyen didn't smile. "I understand," she said evenly. "But for clarity, we need documentation. Otherwise, by law, the default surrogate is the spouse." My mom's eyes flashed. "I told you." Dr. Nguyen held up a hand gently. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm not arguing. I'm explaining the legal framework. If there is no valid healthcare power of attorney on file, then you as the spouse would be the primary decision-maker." Kyle looked like someone had pulled the rug halfway out from under him. Mark cleared his throat. "The documents exist," he said. "We can provide them." Dr. Nguyen nodded once. "Please do. Until then, I will document that there is uncertainty regarding surrogate decision-making. We will continue current care while this is clarified." My mom's voice went tight. "We don't have time for bureaucracy. This is my husband." Dr. Nguyen's gaze stayed calm. "That's exactly why we have to be careful," she said. "Because the decisions are serious." I felt something like relief, small, cautious, because for the first time the hospital wasn't just accepting my mother's narrative without friction. And then my mom did something that made my skin crawl. She reached over and put her hand on Kyle's forearm, a subtle squeeze like she was reminding him, "Don't lose your nerve." Kyle nodded quickly and said, "Dad told me he didn't want to be kept alive like a vegetable." The words hit the room like a slap. Dr. Dorian's expression didn't change, but Melissa's eyes flicked to mine for a split second, then away, like she'd heard versions of this story before. I leaned forward. My dad never used language like that, I said. Ever. My mom's head snapped toward me. You don't know what your father said in private. That's convenient, I replied, voice tight, because he can't contradict you. Mark's tone hardened. Ethan, please. No, I said, surprising myself. I'm done being quiet. I turned to Dr. Norian. Doctor, may I ask a question directly? If he survives, what are the realistic chances he regains meaningful function? Dr. Norian paused carefully. It's hard to predict, she said, but given the extent of the stroke, the chances of full recovery are low. There may be some awareness, some ability to respond, but he may need long-term care. He may not return to independent living. My mom seized on that immediately. He would hate that. I stared at her. He would hate being spoken for, I said. My mom's eyes were icy. Ethan, you're making a spectacle. Dr. Nguyen cut in again, politely firm. At this stage, we aren't making irreversible decisions today, she said. We're planning. But the question of who can legally consent needs to be resolved quickly. The meeting ended with no fireworks, but the room felt charged when we stood up. As soon as we were in the hallway, my mom hissed at me. You embarrassed us. I laughed once, humorless. You mean I embarrassed you? Kyle stepped closer. You're not helping, he said. I looked him dead in the eye. Tell me the truth. Did Dad actually sign anything naming you as Proxy, or did Mom push you into this? Kyle's face flushed. Shut up. My mom snapped. Do not interrogate him. Kyle's eyes flicked toward the nurse's station, and for a second he looked scared. Not of me, but of being overheard. That was my second clear sign. Something was wrong. Kyle cared a lot about who heard what, but not nearly as much about my dad. That night I made a decision I should have made earlier. I called an attorney. Her name was Priya Desai. She wasn't a family attorney. She was a healthcare attorney, recommended by a coworker who dealt with a guardianship case for his mother. It was nearly 9 p.m., and I expected voicemail. She answered on the second ring. I explained the situation, fast but clear. ICU, unconscious father, brother listed as Proxy without document, mother controlling access, hospital acknowledging uncertainty. Priya listened and asked questions that cut through the emotion like a scalpel. Is your mother willing to be the decision-maker herself? She asked. That's the strange part, I said. She's acting like Kyle has to be the proxy, like she needs him in that seat. Because if she's the surrogate, Priya said, the hospital will scrutinize her decisions more closely, especially if other family objects. A spouse is expected, but a spouse can also be challenged. A designated agent sometimes feels more final. My stomach twisted. So what do I do? If there is no valid healthcare power of attorney, Priya said, you can request the hospital follow default law, spouse first. But if you believe your mother is not acting in his best interest, you can petition the court for emergency guardianship. It's serious, it's fast, and it can get ugly. Ugly already felt like an understatement. Priya continued, before we file anything, I want you to document everything. Dates, times, who said what, who denied access, what the hospital told you about the proxy status. Also, this is important, ask the hospital for the communication records related to consent and decision-making. They may not give them to you now, but you want that request on record. Communication records. The phrase echoed in my head. I thought of Melissa's comment. Lots of calls, lots of requests, notes, timestamps, a trail. After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the hospital and watched the ICU windows from the parking lot, like I could somehow will my father back into his body through sheer attention. I realized something else then, something painful and practical. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was a systems problem. And if my mom had been working the hospital phones, leaning on staff, pushing for certain outcomes, controlling the flow of information, then the truth wouldn't come out through emotion. It would come out through records, through the very things my mother couldn't charm, guilt, or bully, because paperwork doesn't care who cries louder. And if the hospital had been documenting every call, every approval, every Kyle said yes, every Linda requested, then sooner or later the story my mother was telling would collide with the story the hospital had written down. I just had to stay standing long enough to see it happen. The next morning I walked into the ICU waiting area with a notebook in my pocket. Not a dramatic notebook, just a plain black one I used for work. But it mattered, because it changed how I carried myself. I wasn't just a stressed son anymore. I was someone who was documenting. My mom was already there. Kyle, too. They had coffee cups in that familiar posture of ownership, like the waiting room belonged to them because they'd sat in the same chairs long enough. I didn't greet them. I sat a few seats away, opened my notebook and wrote the date and time at the top of the page. Kyle noticed and frowned. "Seriously?" he muttered. I didn't look up. "I'm keeping track," I said. My mom's voice went sharp. "Of what? So you can sue your own family?" That was her favorite move. Jump straight to the most extreme interpretation so she could paint me as unstable. "I'm keeping track," I repeated, because nobody can keep their story straight. That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed like slits. Kyle's knee started bouncing again. A few minutes later, Dr. Nguyen walked past the waiting room, heading toward the unit. She glanced in, saw us, and paused just long enough to say, "We'll have an update this afternoon." My mom stood instantly. "Doctor, can I speak?" Dr. Nguyen held up a hand, polite but firm. "This afternoon," she repeated, and kept walking. My mom sat back down slowly, her face tight. That tiny boundary, one sentence, did more to unnerve her than anything I'd said all week, because she couldn't manage it. Around noon, Tanya, the social worker, approached me. "Ethan?" she asked. I stood up immediately. "Yes." She looked at my mom and Kyle, then back at me. "Do you have a moment to speak privately?" My mom's head snapped up. "Why?" Tanya kept her voice neutral. "I just need to clarify some family contact information." My mom opened her mouth, but I was already following Tanya down the hallway. In a small consultation room, Tanya closed the door and lowered her voice. "The charge nurse documented a conflict," she said. "That triggers a review. Risk management may get involved." My stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means," she said carefully, "that the hospital has to ensure we're taking consents from the correct person and that no one is being improperly excluded. It's not personal, it's policy." I nodded slowly. "Good." Tanya hesitated, then added, "Also, it's been noted that there were a high number of calls to the unit and to the physician line. Some of them were after hours." After hours. My skin went cold. "From who?" Tanya didn't answer directly, but her silence felt loud. "I want to request those records," I said. Tanya exhaled. "You can request anything," she said, "but without authorization, we can't release patient-specific information to you." "I'm not asking for his labs," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I'm asking about decision-making communications. If someone pressured staff, if there were repeated calls, if instructions were given, those are relevant to the Proxy dispute." Tanya looked at me like she was measuring what she could say without crossing a line. "If risk management reviews," she said, "they can look at internal logs." Internal logs? I thought of what Priya told me. Get the request on record. "Can you note in the chart that I'm requesting an audit of the communication and consent trail due to a disputed Proxy status?" I asked. Tanya blinked, slightly surprised by the phrasing. Then she nodded. "I can note that you have concerns and that you are requesting a review." "Please do," I said. When I walked back into the waiting room, my mom looked up at me like she'd been waiting to attack. "What did you tell them?" she demanded. I sat down and opened my notebook again. Wrote, 12:47 p.m. Tanya requested private conversation. My mom's eyes widened just a little. "Ethan, stop writing things down. You look insane." I looked at her. "Then stop giving me things worth writing down." Kyle scoffed. "You're doing this to punish Mom." "I'm doing this," I said, "because you two are making decisions like you're the only people Dad ever loved." My mom's face tightened, and for a moment I thought she might actually cry, but she didn't. She did what she always did instead. She went colder. "You know what?" she said, voice low. "Maybe you should go home. You're not helping." I almost laughed. "I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes narrowed. "We can have you removed." That was the first overt threat, and she said it like she'd already researched whether she could. Kyle leaned toward her. "Mom, just ignore him. Ignore him." That was the plan. Always. But now there were too many eyes on us. Nurses passed through the hallway. Tanya had spoken to me privately. Dr. Nguyen had set boundaries. The system was starting to notice the tension my mom thought she could keep contained. That afternoon, the hospital scheduled another meeting, this time with an ethics consult. The word ethics sounds dramatic, like a courtroom scene. It wasn't. It was a small group, an ethics committee rep named Paul, Dr. Nguyen, Tanya, Melissa, and us. Paul spoke in a calm, measured tone. "We're here because there appears to be uncertainty and conflict about surrogate decision-making and communication," he said. "Our role is to support the care team and family, and to ensure decisions align with the patient's values and the appropriate legal framework. My mom sat upright like she was on trial. Kyle kept tapping his fingers on his knee. Mark Holloway wasn't there this time, which I found interesting. Either my mom didn't want him to hear something, or the hospital didn't want him in the room. Paul looked at Tanya. Who is currently listed as the decision maker? Tanya answered. Kyle Mercer is listed as healthcare agent, but the attending physician requested documentation, and there is currently no signed power of attorney on file. Paul nodded and wrote something down. So, he said, in the absence of a valid healthcare power of attorney, the default surrogate is typically the spouse, Mrs. Mercer. That would be you. My mom's jaw clenched. I don't understand why we're wasting time on this, she said. My husband is dying. Paul's tone didn't change. Because these decisions matter, he replied, and because there have been concerns raised about information sharing and pressure on staff. Pressure on staff. Kyle's head snapped up. Who said that? Paul glanced down at his notes, then back up. There have been reports of frequent calls and requests, he said calmly. I won't attribute them in this meeting. My mom's lips parted slightly. Then she recovered. I have every right to call about my husband. Of course, Paul said, but it has to be within appropriate boundaries and it cannot interfere with the care team's ability to provide care or communicate fairly with family. I leaned forward. Can I say something? Paul nodded. I kept my eyes on the table so I wouldn't get pulled into my mom's glare. I'm not here to block care, I said. I'm here because I've been excluded completely. I've been denied updates. I've been told Kyle has authority but no document exists. And I'm afraid decisions are being made based on what my mom wants, not what my dad would want. My mom's voice cut in sharply. How dare you? Paul held up his hand gently. Mrs. Mercer, he's expressing a concern. Let him finish. I forced myself to keep going. My dad was steady, I said. He didn't panic. He didn't make snap decisions. He believed in doing things properly. If he's going to be taken off life support, I want to know that it's truly medically appropriate and legally appropriate, and that nobody pressured anyone into it. Dr. Wujen's gaze stayed neutral, but I saw a flicker like she respected the wording. Kyle spoke next, voice defensive. You're acting like we're trying to kill him. No, I said quietly. I'm acting like you're trying to control him. My mom leaned forward, eyes blazing. You do not get to accuse me, she hissed. You have no idea what I've dealt with. You weren't there when he started forgetting things. You weren't there when he... She stopped herself mid-sentence, and that stop, that sudden clamp down, was a little crack, because it suggested there was a longer story, something she didn't want to say in front of staff. Paul watched her carefully. Mrs. Mercer, he said, do you believe your husband had expressed clear wishes about prolonged life support? My mom's eyes flicked to Kyle. Yes, she said quickly. He told us. Dr. Nguyen asked gently, did he have an advance directive or living will? My mom's jaw tightened. No, and no healthcare power of attorney. Dr. Nguyen asked. My mom's voice hardened. We're getting it. Paul made a note. Then he said, given the lack of documentation, we recommend the hospital follow the default surrogate policy until documentation is provided. That would mean Mrs. Mercer is the surrogate, not Kyle. Kyle's face changed. Shock, then anger, then panic. That's not fair, he said. I've been the one doing everything. My mom's expression went rigid, like she'd just lost a chess piece she thought was untouchable. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt even more alarmed. Because if my mom was forced into the surrogate role officially, she might move faster. She might push harder. She might try to lock in irreversible decisions before anyone could stop her. And I knew something else too. If the hospital now saw Kyle as the wrong decision maker, they'd start looking backward at what had already been done. What consents were signed. What calls were made. What requests were placed. What pressure was applied. After the meeting, as we walked into the hallway, my mom grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. You think you've won? She whispered. I pulled my arm away. This isn't a game. Her eyes were wild with controlled rage. You have no idea what you've done. Kyle stepped close. You're tearing the family apart. I stared at him. You tore it apart when you took Dad's voice. My mom leaned in even closer, her voice so low it was almost gentle. If your father dies, she said, you'll remember that it was you who made his last days chaotic. There it was, the poison, the guilt threat, the attempt to plant a memory in my future. I didn't answer. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. That evening, Priya called me back. I spoke with someone I know in hospital administration, she said. Not about your father specifically, just generally. If risk management is involved, they will review communication logs and consent documentation. If anything looks irregular, they'll correct it. My heart pounded. How long does that take? Sometimes quickly, she said. Sometimes not. But your best move is to stay calm, stay present, and keep documenting. The next day, I arrived at the hospital to find my mom and Kyle standing near the nurses' station, voices raised. I slowed my steps and listened. Kyle was saying, "Why are they asking me questions? I didn't do anything." My mom snapped back, "Because you said too much. You should have just." She cut herself off when she saw me. Melissa, the charge nurse, stood across from them with her hands clasped in front of her, calm but firm. "Ma'am," she said, "I need you to lower your voice. We are in a critical care area." My mom's face shifted instantly into a calmer mask. "I apologize," she said sweetly. "We're just stressed." Melissa nodded once, not fooled. Then she looked at me. "Ethan," she said, "can you come with me for a moment?" My stomach dropped. My mom's head whipped around. "Why does he get to go back there?" she demanded. Melissa's voice stayed even. "Not back there," she said, "to a consultation room." I followed Melissa down the hallway. My heart beat loud enough to feel in my throat. Inside the room, Melissa closed the door and took a breath. "I'm not supposed to share details," she said carefully, "but I need you to know something is in motion. Risk management has requested a review of the communication and consent trail for your father's case." My hands went cold. "A review of what exactly?" Melissa met my eyes. "Call logs to the physician line," she said quietly, "recorded timestamps of who contacted who when, and the approval chain for certain decisions." Approval chain. The phrase hit like a bell. I swallowed. "Did they find something?" Melissa's jaw tightened slightly. "I can't say what they found," she said, "but they're asking questions they don't usually ask unless something doesn't match." I leaned forward. "Does my mom know?" Melissa hesitated. "She's being informed that there's a review." That explained the argument at the nurses' station. My mind raced. If my mom had been calling after hours, pressuring residents, demanding certain language, pushing for DNR discussions before my dad had a full assessment, those calls would show it. Even if she lied now, the timestamps wouldn't. But then another thought slammed into me. What if she used Kyle's phone? What if she called under his name? What if the logs made Kyle look like the one applying pressure, while my mom stood behind him with clean hands? I asked Melissa carefully, "Do the logs show who called? Like the number?" Melissa didn't answer directly. She just said, "They show what they show." Then she added, "Someone from administration may want to speak with you." My mouth went dry. "Today?" Melissa nodded, "Possibly." When I walked back into the waiting area, my mom was sitting very still, hands folded in her lap. Kyle paced near the vending machines, running a hand through his hair over and over. They looked like people waiting for consequences. My mom saw me and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There you are," she said. "We need to talk." I didn't sit. "About what?" She patted the seat beside her like I was a child. "About your behavior," she said, "and about how we move forward as a family." I stared at her. "We're not having a family talk while Dad is in the ICU. Her smile tightened. "You think the hospital is on your side," she said softly, "but you don't understand how this works." I looked at Kyle. "Do you?" Kyle stopped pacing and glared at me. "You're smug," he said. "You think you're some hero." "I think you're scared," I replied. Kyle stepped toward me. "I'm not scared of you. I'm not the one you should be scared of," I said quietly. "If the hospital is pulling call logs, it means someone noticed something." My mom's eyes flashed. "Stop spreading paranoia." But her voice was too quick, too sharp, like she was trying to smother a fire she could already smell. A few minutes later, Tanya appeared again, this time with a man in a suit and a hospital badge. He didn't look like a doctor. He looked like paperwork made human. Tanya cleared her throat. "Ethan, this is Mr. Lawson from Risk Management. He'd like to speak with you." My heart hammered. Mr. Lawson nodded politely. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "can we talk privately?" I glanced at my mom and Kyle. My mom's face had gone pale under the makeup she'd applied too carefully. Kyle looked like he might throw up. I followed Mr. Lawson and Tanya into the consultation room. As soon as the door shut, Mr. Lawson opened a thin folder. "I want to be clear," he began. "This is not a criminal matter. This is a compliance and patient rights review." My mouth was dry. "Okay. He looked at me directly. You raised concerns that you were excluded from communication and that surrogate decision-making may have been assigned incorrectly. Yes, I said. I did. Mr. Lawson nodded. We initiated an internal review, he said. As part of that, we examined the communication logs to the physician line and the documentation trail for consents and approvals. My pulse thudded hard. Then he said the sentence that made my stomach drop and my skin prickle all at once. There are discrepancies we need to clarify, and the call logs are very specific. He paused, like he was choosing his next words carefully. We're going to bring your mother and brother in, he said, and we will review the timeline. Timeline, call logs, approval chain. I sat there, barely breathing, because I realized the next conversation wasn't going to be about feelings anymore. It was going to be about receipts. Mr. Lawson's office wasn't really an office. It was another beige consultation room, just with a laptop open on the table and a second chair placed at an angle like they'd designed the space for uncomfortable conversations. Tanya sat beside him, hands folded, eyes soft but alert. I stayed quiet, because for once, silence felt like the smartest thing I could contribute. Mr. Lawson looked at his folder again. Before we bring anyone in, he said, I want to confirm what you're asking for. Are you requesting inclusion in medical updates and clarification of surrogate decision-making? Yes, I said, and I want to know how my brother was listed as proxy without documentation. Mr. Lawson nodded as if that was the most reasonable thing in the world. Understood. Then he added, I also want to confirm you are not alleging physical harm. You're alleging improper process and exclusion. Correct, I said, but improper process can lead to harmful decisions. He didn't argue that. A knock came at the door. Tanya stood and opened it. My mother walked in first, chin lifted, eyes a little too bright, like she'd done a fast mental reset in the hallway and decided to perform calm. Kyle followed behind her, shoulders tense, jaw clenched. Mark Holloway wasn't with them. That alone told me this wasn't a conversation my mom could manage with legal theater. Mr. Lawson gestured for them to sit. Mrs. Mercer, Kyle, thank you for coming, he said, polite but firm. This is a risk management review regarding communication and surrogate decision-making for Mr. Robert Mercer. My mom sat down slowly, hands smoothing the front of her sweater like she was calming herself through ritual. This is unnecessary, she said. My husband is critically ill. Kyle didn't speak. He just stared at the table. Mr. Lawson remained even. We understand this is a stressful time, he said, but our obligation is to the patient's rights and to correct process. My mother gave a small, bitter laugh. Process. While my husband, Mr. Lawson, cut in gently. Mrs. Mercer, we reviewed the chart. At this time, there is no signed healthcare power of attorney document on file naming Kyle as agent. Yet the chart reflected Kyle as the decision-maker for multiple communications and approvals. My mom's face tightened. We told you we were getting it. Mr. Lawson nodded once. Yes, but in the absence of documentation, the default surrogate would be you as spouse. However, he paused and glanced down at his notes. We also have concerns regarding the communication pattern with the physician line and the way updates were restricted. My mother's eyes flicked to Kyle, fast and sharp. Kyle's knee started bouncing again. Mr. Lawson opened the folder and turned his laptop slightly so it faced the group, not just him. I could see lines of text on the screen, timestamps, entries, call notes. Even from a distance it looked like what I'd expected, the kind of sterile record that doesn't care about intentions, only actions. We pulled the call logs to the physician line, Mr. Lawson said. These are calls placed to the ICU's on-call provider line and documentation of physician callbacks. We also reviewed nursing notes documenting family requests and approvals. My mom's voice went tight. Is this legal? To pull call logs? Mr. Lawson didn't blink. It is internal documentation created as part of the care process, he said, and it's reviewed when there is a concern about compliance. He clicked to a section on the screen. On October 24th at 11:18 p.m., there is a call from a number ending in 4427. The note reads, caller identifies as Kyle Mercer, healthcare proxy. Requests physician callback. States family wants to discuss code status immediately. Kyle's face went pale. My mother's posture stiffened like a board. Mr. Lawson continued. There are additional calls from that same number, 12:04 a.m., 12:39 a.m., and 1:12 a.m. The content varies, but multiple notes reference urgency about code status and statements about patient would not want prolonged life support. Kyle swallowed hard. That wasn't, he started. My mom snapped. Kyle, stop. Mr. Lawson lifted his hand slightly. Let him speak, he said calmly. Kyle's voice was raw, not angry, just scared. That was Mom, he said. She used my phone. The room went dead quiet. I felt my stomach drop. Not because I didn't believe it, but because hearing it said out loud in a hospital review made it real in a way my mind still hadn't fully absorbed. My mother's face turned a dangerous shade of controlled rage. Kyle, she hissed, watch your mouth. Kyle looked at her, and for a second he looked like a kid again, caught between fear and obedience. Then his shoulders sagged like something inside him, finally gave out. She told me, he said, voice cracking. She told me it'd be easier if it came from me. That if it came from her, they'd think she was emotional. She said they listened to the Proxy. My mother shot up halfway from her chair. You little. Tanya stood immediately, one palm raised. Mrs. Mercer, please, she said, voice firm. Sit down. My mother slowly sat, breathing through her nose, eyes fixed on Kyle like she wanted to burn him without making a sound. Mr. Lawson didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Mrs. Mercer, he said, are you denying that you placed calls from Kyle's phone, identifying as Kyle the healthcare proxy? My mom's lips parted, then pressed together. I was trying to save my husband from suffering, she said. It wasn't an answer. It was a justification. Mr. Lawson nodded once, as if he'd expected that pivot. Understood, he said, but identifying as someone else in a medical decision-making process, especially when proxy status is disputed and undocumented, creates serious compliance issues. My mom stared at him. Are you accusing me of fraud? Mr. Lawson didn't take the bait. I'm stating that the documentation reflects a pattern of calls identifying as Kyle, he said, and Kyle is saying he did not place them. Kyle wiped his face with his hands, shaking his head. I signed what Mom put in front of me, he muttered. I didn't understand half of it. She said it was just to talk to doctors. My chest tightened. I looked at Kyle and felt something complicated. Anger. Yes, but also a bleak kind of pity. He wasn't built for pressure. He never had been. He was built to be protected, to be guided, to be used. Mr. Lawson clicked again. There's more, he said. On October 25th at 8:17 a.m., a nursing note states, Mrs. Mercer requests that updates not be shared with Ethan Mercer. States, he is estranged and causes conflict. Proxy Kyle agrees. My mother's eyes snapped toward me then, blazing. Because you do, she said, voice trembling with anger. You make everything a fight. I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't, but because the record was speaking for me now. Mr. Lawson continued. Another note on October 26th documents a request to restrict visitation and to limit family meeting attendance to Kyle and Mrs. Mercer only. It also documents staff concern that other adult child was being excluded. My mom leaned forward, voice sharp. I was protecting the situation from chaos. Mr. Lawson's gaze stayed steady. Mrs. Mercer, the patient's adult child has a right to appropriate communication within policy, he said, especially while surrogate authority is unresolved. Tanya added softly, and the care team needs transparency. When someone says the patient would want this, we need confidence that it's not being shaped by pressure. My mom's throat bobbed as she swallowed. For the first time, she looked less like a commander and more like someone realizing the room no longer belonged to her. Mr. Lawson closed the folder. Here is what will happen, he said. Effective immediately, Kyle Mercer will no longer be treated as healthcare proxy. There is no valid documentation on file, and there is now a documented credibility concern. Kyle flinched like he'd been hit. My mom's eyes widened. You can't. Yes, we can, Mr. Lawson said, still calm. We are correcting process. He continued. Default surrogate status returns to the spouse, Mrs. Mercer, unless there is a legal action that changes it. However, given the documented concerns regarding misrepresentation and communication pressure, the attending team will require an ethics-supported family meeting for major decisions, and we will include Ethan as an informed family member in updates, unless the patient's legal surrogate obtains a court order restricting that. My mother's voice went thin, so he gets to interfere. Mr. Lawson didn't budge. He gets to be informed, he said. That is not interference. I felt my throat tighten with something that was almost grief, because it shouldn't have taken call logs and risk management to grant me the basic dignity of being my father's son. Kyle spoke quietly, barely audible. Am I in trouble? Mr. Lawson looked at him. We are documenting this, he said. If you were coerced or misled into signing anything, that is relevant. But I want you to understand, this is serious. Do not identify yourself as Proxy again. Do not place calls on behalf of decision-making authority you don't have." Kyle nodded, eyes shiny. My mom's hands clenched into fists in her lap. "You're all against me," she whispered. Tanya's voice softened. "We're not against you," she said. "We're for your husband." My mom's eyes snapped up. "Don't you dare imply I'm not." But the implication didn't need to be spoken anymore. It was sitting there in timestamps and notes. After the meeting ended, my mom walked out without looking at me. Kyle lingered in the hallway, staring at the floor. I thought he might apologize. He didn't. He just said, "She said you'd try to take over." I stared at him. "I'm not trying to take over," I said quietly. "I'm trying to make sure Dad isn't treated like a problem to solve." Kyle's face twisted. "You think she wanted him to die?" I shook my head. "I think she wanted control," I said. "And control makes people do ugly things while they tell themselves they're doing it out of love." Kyle swallowed and looked away. That evening, Dr. Rion met with all of us, me, my mom, Kyle, this time with Melissa and Tanya present. No secrets, no whispers in the hallway, no just Kyle. Dr. Rion reviewed my dad's condition again. She didn't sugarcoat anything. The odds were still bad. Recovery would be long and uncertain. But she also made one thing painfully clear. No one was pulling the plug that week. Not because she wanted to punish my mom. Not because of my notebook. Because medically, it wasn't yet the right call. They needed more time to see what my dad's brain could do once swelling stabilized and sedation was lightened. When my mom heard that, her face tightened in frustration before she caught herself. And I saw it plain as day. She wasn't just scared of losing him. She was scared of not being able to decide the narrative of how it ended. Over the next 2 weeks, the hospital began a slow process, reducing sedation, checking reflexes, reassessing. Some days were crushing. No response, no change. Other days there were tiny signs that felt like miracles, a squeeze of a hand, a flicker of the eyes, a slight turn toward a voice. I spent hours at my dad's bedside once they allowed me in. I talked to him about mundane things, how the neighborhood looked in fall, how the Panthers were doing, how his favorite coffee brand was on sale. I didn't know if he heard me, but I needed him to know he wasn't alone. My mom came too, but the dynamic had shifted. Nurses no longer stiffened when she approached. She no longer spoke like she owned the unit. She was careful now, controlled, almost brittle. Kyle visited less. When he did, he hovered at the foot of the bed like a man afraid of being asked to act. One morning, about a month after the stroke, my dad opened his eyes and held them open long enough to look at me. It wasn't a movie moment. He didn't speak. He didn't sit up. He didn't suddenly become himself again. But he looked at me, and the look was steady, present. I leaned in and said, "Hey, Dad, I'm here." His fingers moved, just barely, against my hand, and I felt something in me unclench that I hadn't even realized was locked, the terror that he would leave this world believing I abandoned him. A week later, Priya helped me file a limited petition, not to take my mother's rights away, but to formalize shared decision-making and prevent any one person from making irreversible choices without oversight, while my dad's capacity was uncertain. It wasn't about revenge. It was about a guardrail. When my mom received the notice, she called me and screamed until her voice broke. "You did this to me," she said. I held the phone away from my ear, waited, then said calmly, "No, you did this to yourself." She went silent for a long moment. And when she spoke again, her tone was quieter, more dangerous. "You've always hated your brother," she said. I exhaled slowly. "I don't hate Kyle," I said. "I hate what you turn him into. A shield. A weapon. A mouthpiece." She hung up. In the end, the justice didn't look like my mom being dragged out in handcuffs or Kyle having some dramatic breakdown in front of a courtroom. It looked like something quieter, and honestly, more satisfying. It looked like a hospital system saying, "We have records and your story doesn't match them." It looked like decisions moving back into the light, where they could be questioned. It looked like the family mask cracking. Not because I yelled louder, but because the call logs didn't care who had the most convincing tone. My dad eventually left the ICU. He went to a long-term rehab facility with a track and a feeding tube at first. The progress was slow and uneven. Some days he was alert, some days he wasn't. But over time he started to communicate in small ways. Nods, hand squeezes, a faint whisper when the track was managed. Months later, he couldn't tell me everything he remembered from that time. But one afternoon when I was sitting beside him in rehab, he rasped out 3 words that I'll carry for the rest of my life. "You stayed, son." That was it. No speech, no big family reconciliation scene. Just truth. And I realized something that still makes me sick when I think about it. If the hospital hadn't pulled those logs, if there hadn't been an approval chain, timestamps, documented notes, my mother would have rewritten the whole story. She would have told everyone she did what he wanted. Kyle would have nodded and gone along with it, and I would have been painted as the outsider who caused stress while my father died. Instead, the evidence spoke. So if there's one lesson I took from all of it, it's this. When people are used to controlling the narrative, they'll call your questions drama. They'll call your boundaries selfish. They'll call your presence interference. But facts don't care about their labels. And if you ever find yourself standing in a hospital hallway feeling erased, remember this. Systems run on documentation. Ask for the advocate. Ask for the charge nurse. Ask for ethics. Put your concerns on record. Because sometimes the only thing that can stop someone's quiet takeover is a simple timeline that refuses to lie.